A body falls to the savanna floor, wet, trembling, alive. In seconds, it must decide between standing or never getting up again. There is no rest after that, only the march and everything it will demand, until the end. This is the real journey of those born running against time, pursued at every step by those who only await the right moment to attack. The entire journey spans the Serengeti Masai Mara ecosystem, from the volcanic plains of southern Tanzania near Lake Ndutu to the open savannas of the Masai Mara, already in Kenyan territory, situated between approximately the 1st and 3rd degrees south latitude. The complete route exceeds 2,900 kilometers, crossing fertile volcanic soil, dry savanna, and stretches of dense vegetation, each requiring specific physiological adaptations from the bodies that need to traverse them without prolonged interruption. The tourism built around this extreme physical journey generates significant revenue for Tanzania and Kenya, with specialized operators offering extended tracking experiences that allow visitors to witness, over entire weeks, the progressive endurance of these animals from their birthplace to the complete return of the annual cycle. Maasai communities sustain their own economy around this constant flow, with guides specializing in tracking the herds, generating skilled jobs that depend directly on the continuity of this biological phenomenon year after year. The body of a blue wildebeest, Conochaetes taurinus, has been shaped over millions of years specifically to withstand continuous movement on a scale that no other large African herbivore can match. The heart of this animal, proportionally larger than that of domestic cattle of comparable size, pumps blood at a rate that automatically adjusts between rest and extreme exertion, allowing rapid transitions between leisurely walking and sprinting without a prolonged warm-up period. This exceptional cardiovascular capacity is the physiological foundation that sustains the entire migratory journey, long before any consideration of predators or external obstacles comes into play. The digestive system, based on a specialized fermentation chamber, capable of processing even relatively tough and fibrous grass, allows the species to extract sufficient energy from vegetation that other herbivores would consider nutritionally too poor to sustain prolonged movement. This digestive efficiency functions like a true internal fuel tank, continuously processing small amounts of food consumed during brief pauses throughout the march, without the need for long periods of digestive rest that would compromise the overall rhythm of the group. The hooves, rigid and specifically adapted to uneven terrain, withstand the repeated impact of millions of strides over consecutive weeks without developing lesions that compromise locomotion. Field veterinary studies document progressive wear throughout the migratory season, but rarely at a level that prevents continued movement, revealing a refined structural adaptation specifically for this function of extreme and continuous endurance. Zebras, in turn, have a complementary digestive advantage. Their simpler digestive system, although less efficient at extracting nutrients from fibrous vegetation, processes food more quickly, allowing for the consumption of a larger volume in less time. This physiological difference explains why zebras often lead the initial grazing phase in a given area, clearing a path through tall grass before wildebeest consume intermediate layers of more nutritious vegetation exposed by previous grazing. The body temperature of both species is regulated through a heat dissipation system that includes a relatively large body surface area in proportion to its volume, as well as specific behavioral patterns such as seeking partial shade during the hottest hours whenever the route allows for small deviations without compromising the overall pace of the group. Under temperatures exceeding 40 degrees Celsius during the afternoon, this efficient thermal regulation literally determines the difference between continuing to advance or suffering irreversible physical collapse. And it is precisely this complex biological engineering, silently refined over millennia, that allows the journey not even to begin before the most critical challenge of all needs to be overcome first. Before any kilometer is traveled, physical engineering needs to kick into gear almost instantaneously. After a gestation period of approximately 8.5 months, female blue wildebeest concentrate the vast majority of births within a window of a few weeks on the volcanic plains of the south, a reproductive synchronicity that also represents physiological synchronicity. All the offspring need to develop basic motor skills practically at the same time, creating a collective wave of accelerated neuromuscular development that science is still studying to fully understand its exact mechanisms. The newborn calf, with an initial body mass proportionally small in relation to the adult size it will reach, needs to immediately activate motor reflexes that, in other species of terrestrial mammals, would take days or weeks to fully develop. Within minutes, still immature muscles receive enough neural signals to maintain an upright posture, and shortly thereafter, sufficient motor coordination to run alongside their mother across uneven terrain without stumbling, which would significantly compromise their immediate survival. Zebras with gestations exceeding 12 full months produce foals that are significantly more developed at birth, with proportionally longer legs and more advanced musculature compared to wildebeest calves of the same age. This difference in gestational investment reflects distinct reproductive strategies between the two species. Wildebeest prioritize synchronized quantity and accelerated emergency motor development, while zebras invest additional gestational time in more complete physical development even before the moment of birth. In the weeks following birth, both species progressively accumulate muscle mass, cardiovascular capacity, and digestive efficiency in a phase of intense physical strengthening that prepares the young organism specifically for the extreme effort that the northward march will demand once the rains completely cease. This period of accelerated growth, documented through regular measurements of weight and locomotor capacity in field studies, reveals a rate of physical gain that significantly surpasses patterns observed in comparable domestic species. It is this body, still in the process of intense strengthening, that will very soon need to sustain entire weeks of continuous movement under increasingly hostile climatic conditions, testing every physiological adaptation developed over millions of years of joint evolution between the two species and the territory they share. When the northward march finally begins, the entire body enters a prolonged endurance mode that tests every physiological system simultaneously. An adult blue wildebeest can lose up to 10% of its body weight in water during a single week of movement in extreme heat, activating internal prioritization mechanisms that preferentially redirect blood flow to vital organs, sacrificing peripheral muscle performance in exchange for long-term functional survival, an automatic physiological adjustment that occurs without any conscious control from the animal. The leg muscles, subjected to constant repetitive effort, along routes exceeding 80 kilometers daily in certain more intense stretches, develop progressive endurance through metabolic adaptation that allows for more efficient burning of energy reserves accumulated during previous periods of abundant feeding. This capacity for efficient energy conversion explains why individuals who enter the walking phase with adequate body reserves can sustain a consistent pace for weeks, while more debilitated animals show a progressive decline in measurable physical performance day after day. Zebras with a muscle structure proportionally better adapted for sustained running compared to wildebeest often maintain a more constant pace over long stretches, although they consume a proportionally larger volume of water due to a relatively faster metabolism. This physiological difference between the two species explains observed positioning patterns within the migratory column, with zebras frequently alternating between leading and intermediate positions according to specific terrain conditions and water availability along each stretch of the journey. Puppies that keep up with this pace, now with additional weeks of development since birth, face a proportionally greater physical challenge. They need to take almost twice as many steps to maintain a pace equivalent to that of adults, a significantly higher relative cardiovascular effort that requires even more efficient recovery capacity during the brief pauses allowed along the daily route. It is precisely in this context of accumulated physical exhaustion, when energy reserves begin to progressively deplete, that occasional attacks by lions and cheetahs exploit individuals whose bodies already show visible signs of fatigue, not as protagonists of the narrative, but as a direct and predictable consequence of a physiological system that inevitably exhibits individual variation in resistance among millions of bodies simultaneously advancing along the same extreme path. To reach the banks of the Grumeti or Mara rivers, wildebeest and zebras must necessarily cross a vast stretch of open savanna, punctuated by rocky outcrops and sparse shrub vegetation, territory that lions have occupied for generations precisely because of its strategic position along the water access corridor. Unlike isolated opportunistic ambushes, this territorial positioning is deliberate and culturally transmitted among resident females. Entire prides establish themselves specifically at the geographical narrowing points that every herd must cross before even seeing the current. The lion's choice of this territory is no accident. Low hills and rocky outcrops offer a wide view of the approaching pride's movement in the distance, as well as sufficient partial cover for a stealthy approach in the final moments before the attack. Lionesses, operating in coordination that may involve simultaneous positioning at multiple points along the same corridor, wait patiently while observing the behavior of the approaching pride, identifying with almost surgical precision individuals who show signs of accumulated fatigue from weeks of previous marching in heat that can exceed 40 degrees Celsius during the most intense hours of the afternoon. The attack, when executed, takes advantage of the elongated and vulnerable formation that the pride assumes when crossing narrow terrain between rocks or denser vegetation. A lioness isolates the chosen target from the outer edges of the moving column, knocks it down with her own body weight in a final run of a few meters, and bites the throat, ending any possibility of reaction in a matter of seconds. Unlike hunting in completely open fields, this specific combination of terrain and collective pride behavior favors very short-range ambushes, drastically reducing the reaction time available for any individual to detect the danger before it is too late. Cheetahs simultaneously exploit this same corridor, using a radically different strategy. Preferring more open stretches within the same transition zone, where they can effectively use their extreme speed without obstacles that compromise the pursuit, adult cheetahs position themselves on the edges of areas with low vegetation, waiting precisely for the moments when cubs or juveniles stray, even minimally from the numerical protection of the main group during the crossing of this territorial zone. A cheetah sprinting at speeds that can exceed 168 miles per hour needs a relatively short pursuit window to capture young prey whose escapability has not yet reached full muscular development. This simultaneous combination of two predators operating through completely distinct strategies, coordinated ambush versus solitary high-speed pursuit, within the same obligatory passage corridor, transforms this land stretch into one of the deadliest of the entire migratory journey, even before any wildebeest or zebra has even sighted the water they desperately seek to reach. Conservation authorities from both countries are increasingly intensifying the comprehensive protection of this specific land corridor, recognizing that fragmenting it through agricultural expansion or uncontrolled infrastructure would directly compromise the complete sequence of predatory behavior that characterizes this stage of migration, with consequences that would also extend to the population dynamics of lions and cheetahs that territorially depend on this predictable seasonal concentration of prey, Recent investments in collaborative territorial research between Tanzanian and Kenyan universities seek to map with increasing precision the occupancy patterns of this corridor across different seasons, generating data that directly assist long-term conservation strategies for the entire extent of the shared ecosystem. Meanwhile, the survivors who managed to completely traverse this ambush-ridden stretch of land finally spot, on the horizon, the denser line of vegetation indicating the proximity of water. But this sight, far from representing definitive relief, only signals the transition to the next challenge in this relentless sequence, where completely different predators await submerged, ready to exploit exactly the same type of physical vulnerability accumulated throughout this entire terrestrial journey. During river crossings, this partnership transforms in an even more dramatic way. Zebras, being proportionally more efficient swimmers, often cross first, unintentionally acting as a living indicator of where Nile crocodiles are positioned within the current, while wildebeest following behind. Observing the behavior and reaction of the zebras ahead, slightly adjust their entry point into the water, an emergent collective decision that, while not eliminating any risk of attack, distributes probability in such a way that neither species faces the most dangerous moment of the entire journey alone. Upon reaching the banks of the Mara River, the migratory column stops abruptly, as if all the energy accumulated over weeks of continuous marching suddenly collided with a single insurmountable obstacle, and thousands of blue wildebeest and plain zebras huddled together on the banks, hesitant, forming a compact mass of bodies pushing against each other by the physical pressure of those behind, a hesitation that can last minutes, sometimes entire hours, until the collective pressure of extreme. Thirst forces the first individual to plunge into the current, a gesture that triggers, in seconds, an avalanche of thousands following behind in collective panic. It is precisely at this moment that Nile crocodiles attack. Submerged for hours with only their eyes and nostrils visible above the waterline, they await the exact moment when the chaos of the crossing drastically reduces the reaction capacity of any isolated individual, and an adult crocodile weighing over 700 kilograms dashes towards its chosen target at a speed that can exceed 26 kilometers per hour underwater, closing its jaw with a force exceeding 2,000. Kilograms per square centimeter, enough to crush bone as if it were dry wood, and instantly pulling the victim below the surface, often repeatedly spinning in a rotational motion that serves to dismember the prey before final submersion. Multiple attacks occur simultaneously at different points along the same stretch of river during a single crossing, and while one crocodile submerges with its prey, another immediately positions itself for the next individual approaching the current, creating a scenario of almost uninterrupted violence that can extend for entire minutes while the herd continues crossing. Cubs and weaker individuals, with less ability to swim against the force of the water, become preferred targets precisely because they offer less physical resistance during the attack. But even in the face of this concentrated violence, the vast majority manage to cross successfully, statistically protected by the sheer total volume of bodies entering the water at the same time. As soon as they reach the opposite bank, the survivors shake the water off their bodies and resume their march almost immediately, without time for prolonged recovery, for there is no pause to mourn those left behind, trapped in the jaws of the river. The migration does not interrupt its course for any loss. It simply moves forward, incorporating each crossing as another obligatory stage of a cycle that will repeat itself on the same river, with the same risks, in the next season and the next. If this little-known part of the migration, which happens long before the river crossing, surprised you, subscribe to the channel to follow the next expeditions, leave a like, and share with someone who also needs to know this forgotten part of the journey.